understand that politics is not perfect, but once in a while it produces utterly amazing outcomes. For example, the election of Lula in Brazil, in the past and in the present, exemplifies the support by workers and the poor and the representation of those people in Brazil. For example, the fact that David Cameron passed a policy allowing gay marriage in the past necessarily is a outcome and consequence of years of bloc voting and lobbying done by groups such as LGBT support groups. This is something that happens in our society insofar as parties always have an incentive to seek support from voters that are not necessarily represented in the status quo in order to compete against the opposition party, in order to compete against the main party that's in control of the government as of that point in time. What this motion does is that it breaks apart policies and momentum and efforts to represent the people that are currently marginalized and underrepresented and locks them in forever. That is why we oppose this motion. A couple of responses to opening government then. Firstly, I want to clarify that this motion requires a trade-off, i.e. you can either vote or buy insurance. You can't do both. I think that's a misunderstanding coming from opening government. Secondly, their only claim is to do with social movements and why they gain more representation as a result of this motion. I would argue that this is oftentimes the other way round because voting will be less of an option, less palatable and appealing option for LGBT individuals, for example, compared to buying insurance. Why? Because individuals will prioritize buying insurance over voting. That is for the reason that there is unclear benefit that you get from voting insofar as you don't know whether or not your party will win the next election. And as such, you're more likely to prioritize the certain benefit of getting some payback from insurance, but also necessarily individuals believe that one vote does not make any difference in politics. That is why it is much more rational for individuals to buy insurance as opposed to voting for a particular political party. That means that majority-dominated political parties, for example, will never have the incentive to represent minorities, for example. And minority parties will die off. They will not be able to get any support from LGBT individuals insofar as that this is the incentive that LGBT individuals, for example, have in politics. That is why they end the effort, years of effort, that political parties and lobbyists have made to materialize some of the greatest benefits of for minority groups. That is why it produces the opposite effect as what OG wanted in this debate. 4 arguments. Firstly, why this leads to domination by the rich. Our claim is that the poorer you are, you're more likely to use insurance. This is for the simple reason that obviously for the poor people, money is more important. For the rich, it doesn't matter. They might as well vote anyways. What does this mean in this debate? It leads to 2 key outcomes. Firstly, it leads to the short-term dominance of the politics by the rich. This means that you get, for example, less taxation on the rich, less taxation on corporations, for example. And that also means you have far less support for things like welfare, the things that help people on the ground, which we currently see in society on the other side of the house. But also, you must recognize that this leads to a long-term harm of domination by the rich. What does this look like? It means that there is no return for the poor, return for minorities that OG wants to protect, insofar as the policies, for example, are crafted by the majority, the rich in this case, who have an incentive to lower the money that people can get through buying insurance, who have an incentive to, do some trick on the calculations used to determine the future outcome, future harms that these individuals might get. This means the return that people get under OG's best case is low. Secondly, it means that you are more likely to change the election method, especially in countries that are under-democratized. It means, for example, making it more complicated to go to an election. It means that reducing advertising for election because the rich people don't want to pay money to the poor in the first place. This means in the long term, you have far more representation of the poor and far more policies directed at supporting the poor as well. But also, additionally, it means that you have far less political parties that represent minority groups as well, because again, these parties won't be able to get the vote. So you don't see anything like compromise building in parliament or, negotiations done by some, within parliament, for example, to get support from minority groups as well. The comparative is far worse on their side of the house for the poor, for minorities, and all of those people. Secondly, it increases sentimentalism and extremism on their side of the house. If people are rational, they won't vote because they know that insurance is the best way to go. But the people with intense political views, for example, people with hardcore ideological beliefs will continue to vote because that's what they want. This means 2 things. Firstly, it increases extremism. This is people that are anti-immigrants and they want to kick, immigrants right now from America, for example. It means that you want to, for example, allow the use of guns everywhere in the U.S. All of those people that are hardcore ideologues will still be able to get the vote because those extremists that support them will continue to vote, whereas the the moderate ones will cease to vote in this case. This means you have far more polarization, for example, that increases the occurrence of violence in these countries. That's a bad thing on their side of the house. But secondly, it also increases populists as well, insofar as their way of election campaigning, for example, the use of rhetoric, the use of emotion, these things go out of rational consideration. This means you also have things like, bad policy making because these people don't have any experience. The fucking up of economies, for example, all of the bad things that you see in America, all of the bad things you see in everywhere else, you are likely to see under opening government's paradigm. That is why it is far worse in terms of that as well. Thirdly, it increases corruption and patronage. Why is this the case? Because political parties need to give back the voters that actually voted for them in order to make sense of the fact that, these voters will continue to vote for the political party as opposed to buy insurance in the future. This means you have far more paying back of money to people that voted you at the cost of people that did not vote, at the cost of people that used insurance, for example. And note, the people that are able to vote in this case are people that are oftentimes rich, people that are oftentimes upper middle class, that don't suffer from the lack of money in the short term. This means in the long term, you have far more money directed at rich communities, for example, investment into gated communities, as opposed to, using the money for welfare. In fact, this money comes from the poor. You tax the poor, for example, in order to give back the money to make it worth it for rich people to continue supporting political parties. That's why you have far more corruption networks. You don't have, for example, long-term investment plans for poor communities under the opening government side of the house, and that's also a harm in this debate. Lastly, on inflation. This is the best case of OG. You get a lot of money, good for the poor, good for minorities, good for everyone. This is actually the worst case scenario for OG. Why? Because the expected cost that OG has to pay for each people that buy insurance is massive, massive, and massive. Look at the environmental damage. Look at the social damage. Look at the cultural damage. Look at the individual economic damage. All of that needs to be taken into account on the OG side of the house. This leads to hyperinflation. And this means a couple of things. Firstly, you have a massive short-term investment withdrawal, lack of goods, increase of prices of goods, for example. That means people are unable to access basic necessities in many of developing countries. But it also means that they don't get economic boost to be able to lift themselves out of poverty into the future, because no company wants to invest in countries that are experiencing high amount of inflation insofar as they see it as a risk. For all of those reasons, this is such a crazy policy, you must not pass it.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Long time no see, everyone. I'd like to talk about one thing as an extension of my partner. Even if we admit the worst case scenario from the other side of the house, that is to say, the loser voter base will face the direct harm in the future, while receiving direct harm is a necessary democratic experience and catharsis, which is a direct clash with the apathy point explained by the other side of the house. Before moving on to my extension, I would like to answer several questions. The first question is, who is benefiting from this policy? Because the model provided by the Prime Minister is that the pool money is distributed to everyone. Like, everyone will buy out this insurance system and they pay the premium, then the pool money is going to be distributed to all the participants. Well, if that's the model, it doesn't benefit anyone in a society, because minority pay money and that money is distributed to minority back. So nobody is substantially benefiting from that tautological mechanism. Secondly, if the ruling party is going to pay for the reparation or compensation, and that is also unfair, because why is it fair to impose the burden upon the shoulder of the winning party? Because the reason why candidates lose election is because they are attractive enough. They are not attractive enough. Yeah, because you are not attractive enough, you lose the election. Why do I have to make compensation for your loss? That is very unfair trade-off. So in any scenario, in any case, the model is flawed. It doesn't make any sense. Secondly, the second claim is that this policy, this insurance model is neutral from lobbying and political activity, because some other third-party independent organization is going to provide this. And no, because oftentimes ruling political parties have ability to influence the composition of board members of those institutions. Even in the case of the Supreme Court, ruling political parties have ability to dispatch justices to Supreme Court. So you can't say that the third party of insurance organization is completely neutral, thereby away from any lobbying power and any political influence. Therefore, as a conclusion of that, is a ruling party is likely to adjust the mechanism of payment, the mechanism of payout to those minorities who lose the electoral base. Therefore, the amount of money that these victims will receive in the future will be a very small amount. Finally, who will buy out this insurance mechanism? The claim from the other side of the house is that diverse kinds of people will buy out this insurance, participate in this insurance. Therefore, the dominance of the rich is less likely to occur. That is false. Most of all, rich people have no incentive to buy out this insurance system because they don't see any value for that. Rich people understand that continuing to vote to their peripheral candidates will eventually benefit them in terms of taxation or subsidy to the business that they are providing in the industry, for example, like military industrial complexes or production of guns or building roads and building and stuff. Therefore, rich people have very small incentive to buy out this insurance as a result of that. By contrast, the less wealthy people, the less affluent people, the least well-off of society are compelled to buy out this vote, and that's the outcome. However, even if you can see that diverse kinds of people will buy out this insurance scheme, then that's also the problem, because my final principle is that everyone should confront the consequence of the decision. Everyone should confront direct harm in the future. That is going to be my final extension. Before moving on, I'd like to take a point from closing government, if you have any. Or I can take you later if you want to. So moving on to my final extension, I'd like to engage with the worst scenario. Even if in the future, some voter base will receive a direct harm, and that is also necessary democratic experience. The thesis of this argument is that even though the person you support lose, you receive nothing in return in the status quo. No reparation, no compensation in the status quo. That means that you will have to face unsatisfactory consequence. You will sometimes gain hatred, hostility, anger against the government, against the state. But that's very necessary collective and personal experience in a liberal democracy. Why is that? There are 4 reasons for that. First of all, personal incentive for voting, which directly clashes with the apathy point explained by the opening government. When you lose the election, or when your supporter lose your elections, and you will face many inconvenient consequence. For example, if you are a Mexican immigrant and Trump and Republican win the election, your social treatment, social welfare for the immigrants is going to be diminished or diluted. In that circumstance, you will confront a massive anger. You will gain the emotion of anger and hatred towards the state. You will have all the more incentive or motivation to go on election and cast the vote in the next election. Therefore, this emotion is a very great necessary experience to incentivize ignorant voter base to be awake and enlightened and to get motivated towards voting to the next election. Second of all, collective experience as a community. When you live in a marginalized community and the Republicans win and the Democrats lose, that means that Trump presidency will provide less favorable policy for your marginalized community. You, as a community as a whole, you experience a negative consequence of that, and you will have a communal discussion about it. Therefore, as a voter base, as a whole, as a group, will be more motivated to participate in the next election. Thirdly, because of that, public discourse is more likely to be activated. For example, there are many policies which are controversial, such as abortion, or capital punishment, gun control, or the foreign policy. We believe attendance of victims is vital in order to impart diverse perspectives towards those public discourse. In that circumstances, it is necessary that some voter base receive direct harm from the ruling party. When we include diverse perspectives from victim side and perpetrator side, we can provide various kinds of policies or aspects toward discussion, which also motivate unwilling voter base. Notice that there's a spectrum of voters in the status quo. Not many people are politically active. There are some floating voters. For those voters, it is necessary for them to be exposed to direct interpretation from the victim side about certain kinds of issues. They should know the reality of the Mexican immigrants in California and so on. Fourthly, by contrast, what will happen on their side of the house is that these rich dominance party will be able to buy out. They can just pay money for people and people will stop go voting. Therefore, those political parties have less incentive to cater to the needs of the marginalized and socially disadvantaged groups in our society. Why this argument is important in this debate? Because we are willing to engage with the worst scenario from from the other side of the house. That is to say, people will receive the harm in the future. That is also necessary for us for democracy. We're happy to oppose. Thank you.